Mm-hmm. So hello everybody. There's a lot of people, some people upstairs as well. My name is Juhani. I'm the one with developer here, so you recognize because we look the same otherwise. And I brought the designer with me as well.
Yeah, my name is Pierre, I'm a designer, and yeah, we're working together with Juhani at Snapp Mobile.
So our idea today is to talk about motion. There's been quite a few motion talks already. There was Rebecca's, there was Nick's talk, there's going to be talk right after us. So first, I'm going to say what we're not talking about. So if you are interested about these topics, then you can just leave. So this is not going to be a tutorial to different animation frameworks. It's not going to be a motion layout tutorial. There's much better talks about all of these details. We're going to talk much more about design, from design point of view. Pierre and I, we work together very closely, and we created this way of iterating fast, working together as designer and developer team. So we're going to talk more about how we work together to create motion.
Thanks. So yeah, today we want to talk about motion, but why motion in the first place? Why we consider motion important? Well, the first reason might sound quite simple. If we look at this example right now, taken from the Google Home onboarding, I'm pretty sure that most of us are looking at the right screen, and that's because our eyes are naturally attracted by movement, so it's normal. Our attention in our brains rises when we see moving object. But that's not the only reason. Where it comes to UI, motion could be used also for other to help with on other points. One of those could be feedback, for example. If we see the Google Docs, which are part of the Google branding to represent the artificial intelligence, we can see that in their static version, they don't communicate that much. But as soon as we add motion to them, we can see that they can express quite various range of different feedbacks. So the users start to understand what the machine is doing in that specific moment through the motion. Motion can also be used to communicate the hierarchy in the UI, specifically for navigational elements, for example, when we have a transition between different views. Motion can help to convey this continuity. Like in the YouTube example here, we can see that through the transition to the bottom of the detail view, the user understands quite quickly that can bring back this element through a reverse gesture. Motion can also be used to bring the attention to specific elements, so where elements are going, and also to hint the user or to educate the user to, for example, perform specific gestures. And finally, motion can also help to basically reinforce the brand. In this case, MailChimp and Duolingo do a very nice job, and they use motion in different parts of the user journey when there is a critical moment, like just right before launching an email campaign, or, for example, giving the high five to the user after the campaign is launched. But yeah, so we have like several options where to use motion and where motion can help. But there are also a couple of guidelines that we should consider when using it. One is, of course, animation must have a meaning. This is, I think, the most important one. We should always ask ourselves, why are we bringing this animation in? Are we doing for the user? We should always keep the user in mind as basically every other UI elements that we are using. We mentioned, for example, before that the motion could help, for example, to reinforce the brand. But if we basically launch the logo animation every time we launch the app from the background, then we are just distracting the user from his journey, which is actually get as much as quicker as possible to the content itself. Animation should also not distract from the content, as we just mentioned, and also should not conflict with the UI patterns or navigational elements. Like in this case, it's always taken from the material guidelines, applying like this kind of custom motion to the main navigation, to the FAB. It's not really, it doesn't really help the user. And finally, we should try to do not over-animate. So that's a trap we can all fall in sometimes, because we want to bring more animation, but we should always make sure that our animation are smooth, feels natural, and mainly they are not there just to waste basically the time for the users. Like this is another example when we have like, too much spring animation on a list view.
All right. So we understand why and what and so on. Then now it's our role. How many of us are developers here? All right. It's a dev conference. Any designers around? Oh, Lorica, yeah.
Few.
There we go. Anyways, so I wanted to talk about what is our role in this one. In some companies, this kind of waterfall approach that designers do something, they drop it on developers, and then developers sweat and can't quite make it happen. I encourage much more active role in this whole thing from the very beginning of doing things. Important things, what we need to do, we need to know Android. We need to know really well what Android does and what are the opportunities. And our role is push the opportunities always. We see something that could be done with the framework that we learned from Rebecca's talk yesterday or something like that, and we want to push it to the designers. They won't be looking at the tech talks in conferences, so that's our role to do things. Limitations, this is a difficult thing for us. Some designers see developers as the difficult people who just go and say it cannot be done. But there is limitation, especially when it comes as complex as animations. There is limitations. We need to figure out where the boundaries are. We need to explain what the boundaries are. But our role is try to overcome them and try to figure out how to go past the limitations and push forward. At the end, when you see a design coming in, you see something very complex coming in, don't get shocked immediately that I can't do this, there's too much thing to do. The first things to do is to break it down and simplify, figure out how you can cheat. I'm going to be talking a lot about cheating in this talk, and you will understand what I mean. We want to talk about a couple of different types of motion, very practical examples, and how we built them. I'm going to be using this application we built. I promise this is not an app pitch, although I do encourage you to download it from Play Store and play around if you want to. It's free, no ads, nothing. Just to give you a background, to get context what these examples are about, this is an application that is a photographer's notebook. Basically, you walk around in the city and you want to come here later to take a photograph in nice sunsets or whatever. You take a picture and you make a note out of it, and so on.
So, first example we want to talk about is state changes. State changes could be like several use cases. It could be toggles when it changed, for example, selected state to a selected one. It could be a state that is loading, so a sort of persistent state, a progress. Or it could be an action that has been completed by the user, and then there could be success or failure and so on. So in our specific case, we had in the onboarding of the app, we needed, or it was important for the app to be customized by the user. So the user would choose his photography subject in order for the app to be more responsive and more personalized. So we have this view with different cards and categories, and the user would basically just pick their favorite subject. And this is what we had at the beginning, so just a sort of unselected, selected state. But it felt a little bit mechanical, so we said, okay, let's try to improve that. So what we thought, I basically tried to illustrate when I think about an animation, I try to use storyboard. Storyboard, it's quite good technique, especially for designer to kind of break down the different steps of an animation, so that we don't forget any of the elements, because there could be complex animation. This is a quick example. And so you can focus on the different steps, like the trigger, what happens in between, how element transit basically to the final state. So in this case, we wanted to have a switch from a selected state, so a scaling animation of the icon on the left, and basically a plus turning into an X on the right. How did we do that? We used Shapeshifter. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Shapeshifter? Oh, that's good. So just super quick dive in. Shapeshifter is a very powerful tool. It's accessible from web. And what it does is that you can create animation and use and export then animated vector drawables. In this case, we had our little icon, our plus. You can import it or create it directly. You have some specific property of the vector path, and then you can animate them. So in this case, we wanted, first of all, to change the color of the icon. So we are going to animate the color from gray to the orange state, and set the duration of the animation. But there is more. Basically, what it's possible to do is also to create groups which contain different vectors. And when animating the group, which have different properties, then all the vector inside can animate at the same time. In our case, we wanted basically to rotate the vector. So we use the rotation animation, and basically we set the new value within the same duration time. And we have very basically a quick output, and basically, yeah, we can preview it and export it. How does it look when we export it? One last thing. Shapeshifter, as we have seen, can be used also for more complex animation. This one was a simple one. So I suggest to follow Alex. There will be another talk after this one, and you can attend to it for more details. So what happened when we export it?
As Pierre mentioned, there's going to be talk about animated vectors right here after the coffee break by Alex, who created the Shapeshifter, and Nick Butcher from Google. So I'm not going to go too much into detail. The takeaway from this one, when designer uses tools like Shapeshifter, the output of the tool is something that I can use directly. So it gives me animated vector drawable, which is very readable code. One thing, for example, with this one we did, I didn't require the animation the other direction, because I was able to do this. You can actually go and just change the values here and start and end values. You can edit and you can get the other one. So your point is that you can try to make the designers work easier, and easier you make the designers work, more time they have to do something else. State drawables, vector drawables, great idea to use a different, show in different states in the applications, like selected state, non-selected state. One great thing about what I love about using state, I try to use it almost everywhere I can. The operating system worries about things. And this is the theme of how to implement animations. Wherever you can offload any kind of logic, any kind of rendering, anything to the operating system, do it. There's people who work just for that stuff at Google and elsewhere, and it's tested on every device and so on. The states can be used for many things, but very simply, again, I'm not going to go too much into detail. I'm sure Nick is going to be talking about this later today. But the idea is that you can say, what is the state in your view, and what is the transition between these states, and then you can get something easy to do. So we ended up with this one. Well, it's not quite exactly what we did. This is actually the code that is running. So we already talked about the right side. Let me see if this works. We only talked about this side here. But we also animated other parts of the things. And there's some neat tricks that we can do. So we talked about two, let's talk about the one. I created this constraint layout. Constraint layout is awesome. But this is kind of suboptimal. You can start seeing things like there's a different view for the background, doesn't make any sense. There's a view for the actual icon and so on, doesn't make any sense superficially. But then when you start going into it, you might lose some optimization somewhere else, and you make your work much, much easier elsewhere. So in this one, we just have 2 stacked views, and the interesting things what you can start then applying the state for is, of course, state can change the color. In this animation, we could have gone to details, and okay, let's morph the color from this color to this one, but it doesn't matter. This is one of those things that you have to make a choice of investing time or good enough. Good enough is something you have to define together with your team, your product owner, your designer, and so on. In this case, it's clearly good enough that color just switches because there's other animation going on. You won't even see if it's animating. So I cut corners. I made it very easy. Other part, state this animator. Really, really nice thing to do. This is probably going to be talked today as well. I'm not sure. But you can add these animations between states directly to your drawables. So in this case, the background just changes. And this is why I have 2 views instead of 1 view, because I want to use the stateless animator to animate the background. If I would put the icon also inside the same view, the icon size would change as well, and it would be not working. Couple of things that really, really cool. I love this attribute in Android. You can say duplicate parent state. So this is a list view. And when it's selected or not selected, I just change value true and false. And with this duplicate parent state, I can make all of the ones inside there as well to react to the same date chains. And these magic attributes that I encourage you to look at, if you haven't, you probably all use it all the time. When designer forgets to give you what the touch feedback should look like, you should always drop this line in there, and then you will have the Android triple touch feedback. So we ended up having this one. Let's see if the animation plays. So now things work. So I actually made it slow down. The debug mode doesn't slow down the vector drawable. I wish it would work. But the point of this animation is now that because I depend on the operating system state and I run all of the animation based on the state, I don't have to worry about anything about synchronizing these different things. I don't have to worry about users who abuse the system and some things you do. If you do it manually, you have to think about, okay, what happens when you terminate transition and so on. And here, the operating system takes care of everything.
So next category, navigation transitions. This is where things become a little bit trickier, but also where animation or motion can help us a little bit. They can help us, for example, to communicate the change of context to the user and basically also express continuity when an element moves from one view to the other or transform from one view to the other. In our specific case, we had basically a list of photos that user has taken, and it could basically switch the view between a list and a map view. And that was the basic implementation we had at the beginning. Again, we felt we could improve this since we are basically showing the same content just in 2 different ways, either list view and map views. So we thought, let's try something else. We, again, broke down the animation into parts, and we thought, okay, what if the list is above the map, a little bit like Google Maps does, for example, and then the user can either tap on the icon again to switch, or drag down, scroll down the view, the list itself. So we tried this. Design-wise, I used Adobe XD. This kind of tools, Adobe XD, Framer X, InVision Studio, they are all interaction-based tools. Basically, what they do is you create different states of your view, of your animation, and then you link the different states together, and you apply attributes to each one. In this case, you can select the trigger, if it's on tap, on drag, on scroll, and so on, the type of easing, the duration of the animation, and so on. And you can basically preview it. You get a video, which is you can interact with, And you can send either the video or the link. So where it comes to handover, the output is going to be either a video or a link, and the developer or other stakeholder can play on their device themselves. What I also find interesting where it comes to hand over specific UI or for complex navigation specifically is exporting hotspots. So we are using Zeppelin a lot. And in Zeppelin, you have the possibility to create hotspots and link the different screens. So even if someone comes on board and is not clear exactly which screens link to the others, you can navigate through these. And of course, you also have to communicate when you come to the polish part, all the different attributes like easing and so on. But most important is the communication in this case, because we are not handing over something like we did with Shapeshifter, something that could be integrated directly, but it's something that has to be built natively.
I mentioned I'm not going to talk about motion layout, but I'm just going to say, you saw this one, and when you get this kind of animation, your mind will go to motion layout. There's going to be a lot of talks online, and even in this conference. Constraints are great. The only thing I'd point out, the last line here, this is one of those magical lines in the Android framework that will make your app look really cool. Basically, it means it automatically figures out what the transition between different states are, and that's quite important. So, yeah, this is pretty much what we ended up with. What we built, one thing about the handover, so this was built by external team in different place. So we actually came up with quite a good solution in my sense, but you see that the animation we built is not exactly what we built, what was defined. This is one of those places where, again, good enough was good enough. We go to the place where, okay, we can add polish, but it's at 5 days of work. It doesn't make any sense. Let's cut it here and go to market and see if the users like this feature at all. So you have to, as a developer, you have to be able to communicate at what point it makes sense to stop working on something. Another type of animation transition, screen size. We used to not to have this problem. Your screen sizes don't change, but now we have. If any of these manufacturers ever make phone that actually works, foldables. But Chromebooks is there. In America, Chromebooks, massive market. You have to start thinking about how does your app scale when the screen size changes. So on a Chromebook, your application run, any user can just resize the screen. This kind of thing looks horrible. You kind of lose the context, you drag and drop things has changed. Great thing about the Android framework is it will just work. Your applications, you don't actually need to do anything to make it work, but it will resize, it will actually recreate the activity, and the context is completely lost. So of course you can think about different things, talk to your designer, how should we do this, how important this is, especially if you're an education application. Chromebooks is a massive market, and I predict that Chromebooks is going to be a massive market elsewhere as well. So you can do something more interesting, let the user understand where the context goes, all of those things. Turns out Pierre and I talked about exactly this thing last year, and there's recording online. However, the technical side of that talk is outdated, and you can ignore everything I say, but if you want the recording, listen what Pierre says. Fortunately, Google created the code lab for exactly this case, so you can replace everything I say with what Google says instead.
So next one is onboarding. Onboarding, it's a part that sometimes is overlooked in apps, but it's actually a very critical moment because it goes with the first-time experience, and we are basically, it's the moment where users see for the first time your app. Here again, motion can help a lot, not only to present your app to them, but also to drive them and explain them, or for example, give them some hints about some specific elements or highlight specific elements on the app. In our case, again, we had very simple onboarding screen. It was one screen with the possibility to start or straight away. But, and we had this sort of static illustration. But again, this illustration doesn't or didn't communicate enough how the app was working, because there are several states how the app performs or function. And so we decided to bring, again, a little bit of motion into it. So we kind of split the animation in phases. So we thought, okay, let's communicate exactly how it works. So the user takes the picture, and then the different categories are basically presented automatically through the app. So to build this little part, I used After Effects. After Effects, it's a quite complex tool for animations, so it's possible to create also long animations and complex animation with different layers. There is the possibility to add keyframes and so on. And this was the animation I came up with, basically. What happened is that through After Effects, there is the plugin, which is a plugin which is body moving, which gives you the possibility to export animation through Lottie. So Lottie, it's very useful in this case, because even though you have like a complex animation built with a tool for animators, you can still use it and export it to your UI. So what happens is that through Lottie you can get a JSON file. There are like tons of guidelines and best practice on the Airbnb.io / Lottie. So there it's possible to follow up the integration for Android, iOS, but they also provide, for example, some guidelines for designers. For this, I extracted like 3 main points for designers. So when you create animation to be exported through Lottie, just try to keep it simple. Don't add too many effects, because they're going to break at some point. Use shape layers and convert your layers to shapes, and export N1X. If you have vectors, you don't have to worry about assets folders and so on, and the system will take care of that. Another quick point to mention is that there is an app. Designer can basically load the export file, the JSON, and see the output directly. And they can also get like how graphs, how the animation is performing, if it's lagging, and also like some warning. For example, this type of path is not supported on this from this OS version on, and so on. So it's quite useful. And when it comes to handover, this is what we get, basically.
So yeah, so it's not quite as nice as the Android vector troubles. We have this screenshot here just to point out that if you ever have to look at the JSON that the Lottie exports, you've done something wrong already. But on the other hand, that's exact specification of the designer, and you can use that file. So don't look at the file, but use the file itself. For positioning handover, we use Zeppelin. We use Zeppelin for almost everything else as well. The great thing about Lottie is that it's just an image view, practically. It supports same things you already use for image view. So your designer can position it in Zeppelin as it would position any image views in general, and you can, as a developer, you can use even the same, scale types from the image view positioning, and you can position everything else the same way. It even is compatible with motion layout. You can hook into certain things, and you have things like listeners and so on. So this is what we ended up with. Much better. I think you kind of understand what the application is doing. So then there's another type of thing. We really have no good name for this one. It's more about, something is happening in the background, and it's important. We all know these loading spinners we can have. Loading spinners are fine, highly uninteresting. It doesn't really tell much to you. So we went a little bit more when it's something that is complex that is happening. Loading spinners are fine if you're loading website or whatever. That's all good. So I have 2 examples here. I have an old build. So when I take a picture in this one, in our messy office. It says loading spinner, and something happens, and something has happened. It doesn't tell much to the user what was going on, where did these things come from, what did the system do. So we improved it a little bit. Let's see if the animation plays. It didn't play. Now it works. So you take a picture, we saw loading spinner, and then we explain to the user, we're analyzing the picture, and we changed the card layout a little bit as well, so it now says suggested categories, but the flow of the systems is clear. Oh shit, sorry. The flow is clear, and the user understands that the system analyzed the image, it looked at what you took picture, and it suggests things for you. It shows things like bird. I don't know, it saw bird in the picture, but that's not our problem. That's MLKit. So there's a couple of things about this thing. When you start doing animations like this, now we come into a place where I had to cheat quite heavily to make it work. Things like random is very difficult when you have animation. What if things overlap? What if things don't work the way it should work, and so on? So I cheated in this one, and I think the result is good enough. So actually I created just points. I created 5 points where I think the dots could be, and I just randomized the points, the order of the things. When the user uses the application, it looks like they're coming randomly. If it's always the same order, they will learn the same order, and they just think about, okay, this is boring. But now it's the same dots, they just come in different order, and it looks completely random to the user. Again, what is good enough? Instead of trying to figure out algorithm that layouts the things randomly on the screen, I can use this one. Other thing, constraint layout is really, really awesome. It makes my life very easy. I'll try to get the animation to play. So when there's a transition between 2 states, now I just have 2 constraint sets of doing things, pulling things together, and things move around. This was a couple of lines of code. But again, the dots things at the top are a little bit different. What if the screen sizes are different, and so on? I said the constraint sets are the easy part. I have the top part of the layout in a certain size, and so on, and then I just move things around, and everything arrives. But I cheated again a little bit. Maybe this is not so much cheating. But what I did, I positioned the dots not with coordinates, but I positioned them as bias instead. So I found certain points in the things. And again, if you are a developer, an Android developer, from the get-go, you have to think about scalable UI. So what if the screen is different size? What if it's a landscape? In some minor cases, in this one, some small screens, they might overlap a little bit, but I didn't see that as critical enough to do anything about it. Again, I can make code and let the operating system worry about it. When I move between 2 states, it's the operating system that does all the calculations, and I don't have to do anything.
So last but not least, user delight. User delight, so there are some specific moments where we want to, for example, celebrate a moment in the user journey, or we want to bring some delight in our product or in our apps for reinforcing the brand, or just adding a little bit more character in that specific gesture, for example. This is another example from another hobby project we had, and it's a step counter, and this is the main view. So the main view just represents a chart, a graph with the counts of your steps and your friends' steps. And we said, okay, that's our core, it's the core of our app. Can we add something more? At the beginning, we had just this blue toolbar, static toolbar. Let's try to do something more. So we came up with this idea of having a custom toolbar, a toolbar where the moment of the day was basically the toolbar would change according to the moment of the day. So there was, for example, sun position or moon position in different ways, and the sun or the moon would animate to that position when opening it. So what I did, I created these different states in Sketch, and I exported to Zeppelin. So for this specific use case, I didn't create a custom animation with a design tool. Like, the communication with the developer was enough to explain my idea, and we basically tweak together on and iterate together on the idea itself. And it seemed to work at the end. So in terms of handover, just having the hue of the gradient and the different assets were enough. All the rest was done on iteration, basically.
This is one of the examples where I simplified things a lot. I saw the peer's idea, and we connected with the idea. We thought that's a good idea. I should try to make it work. It looks complex. It isn't if you simplify a little bit, and you define good enough on the right level. And it took about a day to build this one. So a couple of principles that I used. I mapped everything I saw in the UI to values 0 to 1. Just to make it easier for me to digest the thing, to understand what should happen where. So I had a 0 to 1 for the time of the day and Boolean for night or day. And things like, the animation doesn't actually play when the application is running. It plays a little bit. But things about, like, you look at the sun, it doesn't actually follow the curve. It just goes straight up and then it goes straight down. Okay, it's not how nature works, but who cares, right? Nobody will ever notice this one. I could have done the math to get it right, but why would I bother? I can just define 2 points and to have again between 0 and 1. And because I've done this kind of design or architecture of this animation to map everything to simple values, I can also make everything work with scrolling. So I just fudge the values a little bit, and I just have 0 and 1 anyways, and everything will just work fine. So the end result was actually quite cool. I think it works quite well. So everything was done. This is maybe 2 days of work in the end, so it wasn't horribly difficult. We iterated a lot at the end, and it turned out to be quite good.
So yeah, let's add some motion. So if you want to start or push on animation, I would suggest basically to browse examples that are there already. Try them, so try and learn by doing, and iterate basically on the results. There are a lot of resources online. Lottie files could be quite good. There are animations that you could use straightforward. Or other platforms with tons of examples. Not all of them are good, but worth to get inspired. It's very good to, and I suggest to take a look at the principles in the Google guide, in the material guidelines. They are very well done, structured, and can give very good hints when and how use animations. And when it comes to tools, this is sort of a kind of summary view, because sometimes people ask me which tools you use for animation. There is not one tool fits all, so one solution. It really depends on which type of animation. This is just a little bit of a summary. Depending on the complexity of the animation, I use different tools. It could be just a click dummy for giving the idea, or going more to interaction, or, for example, using After Effects in very complex animations. Of course, with each design tool, there are different ways to hand over, but I think the most important part is the communication and the iteration with the developer, always and anyway.
So I believe that a product is better or correspond directly to how many iterations you get into your product. More times you iterate, the better product is going to be. So you have to figure out, remove all the friction between talking to the designers and so on to make sure. So this is how we go through. We share some discussion ideas first. We don't put anything on a paper. We try things very quickly. If you know Android, Android is the most powerful prototyping platform in the world. I think it's better than any of the prototyping tools if you know it. We keep iterating, we discuss, and then we add polish at the end. Very good example, quick example. This is an application for some reason the animations don't start, sorry about that. When we wanted to add a animation, small minor animation, yes or no type of things when you're learning new characters. So the way we did this one, we built super quickly different things. So basically, this was a Christmas thing that we did together, and this is our iteration tool, Slack. I just take a recording of the video and do things. So we did quite a few iterations on this one. We tried to figure out what is the right ones. So these are the things I sent to Pierre, and Pierre sent me back. And these were all done in half an hour, all of the 10 iterations. And if you get this kind of communication going on, you can create really good products. This says 35 seconds, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly. I wanted to end this talk with showing some things that we think are really, really cool and really, really nice, just to motivate you to find your own ideas. The first example is from Google. They do, again, the animation doesn't work. Somebody should create better presentation tool than Keynote. So this is from Google. You have the Google Now cards, and you have Google News. The Google News is an okay application, but it's a bit horrible in this case. On the other side, the Google News. I like this example because it shows the same use case really well and really crappily. And the new Google Now card, you stay in the context, you get delightful animation, nothing is lost. On the Google News, you have to leave the content and so on. Android Auto. Animation doesn't have to be complex to be good. When you start navigation somewhere, this filling bar here tells me that if I don't do anything, the operating system will press the button for me, which is really great when you're driving a car. And this is a very, very powerful tool to communicate something that's going to happen. Every one of you, even if you never used Android Auto, you knew what's going to happen. Google Fit, I really like the way the charts change. Slightly annoying. When you switch between weekday and things, this is one of the great things where you see that the data flows to the new state, and you help the user to understand where data goes, where it's come from, where does it go. It's a really nice application. Give it a go. Twitter, somebody said that it's very nice when you press the like button. And actually, it's this small detail makes it quite nice to like tweets. One application that won the Google Best App Award, Drops, used it. Very complex animation. Everything is animated. The animations are great, but don't do this in your application. The reason this application is good, and I like it, and I think they did the right thing, it's a game. Games follow a little bit different guidelines than applications do. If you animate everything like this one in your bus schedule application, you will lose all your users immediately. So don't do this unless you're building a cool game like they did. And the last one, this one I really like. The animation doesn't start again. Now you see this last slide. Adding simple animation to add motion, emotion to your application, and call to action, and so on. I really, really like this application. I think this is one of the best applications in the store. I encourage you to install the application and share the meal and give money to somebody who really needs it. That's all for us. Thank you.
Thanks. Stickers.
Oh yeah, we have